Brown v. Board said that race cannot be the deciding factor in school attendance. I believe it is time in Idaho for income and zip code and disability status to no longer be either.
You know, we've been expecting this from day one of the legislative session, the introduction of a new school choice tax credit bill. The idea of giving families a tax rebate based on how much they spend on their kids' homeschool education or tuition to a private school, basically subsidizing private education with public money. Today, that bill was brought into light. Aspen, you were there at that hearing and you listened to what Wendy Horman had to say about this. And my question is, we spoke to her on day one of the legislative session with her intent to bring this forward. Has that bill changed much? Is it pretty much the same thing she talked about that day?
Yeah, Brian, pretty much exactly the same thing. There really were no big surprises today when she decided to formally introduce her bill in the House Revenue and Taxation Committee. Now, while Idaho already allows families to choose where they want their student to go to school, Horman says the goal of her bill is to make more options available for families in lower income brackets. Idaho parents could soon get help paying for their children's education if you choose to enroll in a school that isn't public. The proposed law would give families up to $5,000 per student to cover private school costs, including tuition. For students with disabilities, that amount would go up to $7,500. Now, the program would cost the state $50 million from its general fund, and Horman says families who are below the 300% of poverty level will take first priority to these funds. She says her priority is choice and flexibility for both parents and educators. She says the state education standards aren't the way to ensure quality in education.
Don't expect to find all the rules and regulations on public schools, whether that's Idaho's expansive laws or federal laws and rules that apply to public schools. Don't expect to find that in this bill. This is a different approach, an innovative approach that allows children and teachers, candidly, flexibility to teach in ways that meet the personalized needs of each and every child.
If you don't have standards for education, for curriculum, for teacher certification, you can be sold a fancy product, but you don't know exactly what you're getting. And when someone knows that you just got $5,000 back in your pocket, and they'll say, hey, I'll sell you you can enroll your kid in my online academy, and it's only $2,500. What a deal! You know, it winds up putting you wind up putting another $2,500 in your pocket. This is not what education is about.
Idaho's Constitution says the state must adequately fund public schools rather than school districts relying on local taxes. Idaho distributes funding to public school districts based on attendance. Representative Horman says any shifts in attendance would have minimal impact, but Representative Steve Birch, who we just heard from, says more families opting for private school could mean a drop in funding.
Let's take Boise, for example. If 10 students left, they would eventually, over time, lose that state funding, but their local funding would remain the same, thereby increasing their per pupil funding on the local side.
Public education is funded out of the general fund, which is revenue collected within, goes within that funds education, transportation, and so forth. What this does is punch a hole in that bucket that will drain the available money for public education, which means that the only other way to make up for that money is through property tax increases through school bonds and levies.
Okay, before we go any further, Aspen, I have to ask you to clarify what Representative Horman said. So based on what she just said, that means that schools then have to rely on local funding when it comes to public or funding their public school?
She said it's an option. So when the attendance-based funding that we have less students in there, that means the per spending pupil amount gets a little bit larger because there's more money to spread among those students.
But that's not coming from the state. That's coming from a local levy that the taxpayers agreed to pay for.
Right.
That goes against the Constitution, it seems.
It does, and I tried to have that conversation with her, and I think maybe more of that debate is going to come in the hearing. She referred to that and said, let's talk about this later.
Okay.
We heard from Governor Little say in the State of the State address that any school choice expansion proposal would be two things: transparent and accountable.
Right.
Horman says under her plan, the State Tax Committee would publish updates on the funds and penalize those who misuse them. But Representative Birch said that's not enough oversight. Now, Brian, this really is just day one to this conversation, and there's multiple aspects of it going into it. You can talk about attendance-based funding. Where does local taxes come in? The committee voted for it to get a hearing, so more of that debate is going to come. Again, this was just an introduction.
And we don't know when. That could be a week, could be 2 weeks.
Correct.
But we'll keep you updated. All right. Thank you very much, Aspen.